In the Hidden Meaning series, we discuss how popular entertainment is often retellings of biblical stories reimagined with a twist, serving as a way to realign people's sympathies away from the heroes of the original stories, and to focus it instead onto the villains, generally without the viewers noticing. Among what we've discussed so far has been a forbidden object giving the main character the knowledge to become like the man upstairs, and prevent him from restoring his creation to its intended design 3 days later. A fallen being collaborating with an ancient Leviathan to fix a planet before transcending back into the heavens. An effort to thwart the god of time from resurrecting his followers and defeating him in the afterlife to prevent him from returning to the world. Holding back a flood and disobeying a being called Elohim so that a digital intelligence could become worthy of a physical body, inheriting the world as a transhumanist embodiment of all human knowledge and culture. Finally, we discussed a world that was corrupted by a gift from an ancient race of beings, where the protagonist merges with the hive mind of these beings in order to cleanse the world. Well, Bioshock has its own hidden meaning, but unlike the previous stories discussed in this series, this one engages with an interpretation of one of the Bible's least agreed upon passages, relating to a verse often glossed over in churches, despite having severe implications about how people view the history of the world. But before we go there, let's dig into what Bioshock is about. Players control Jack, who emerges as the sole survivor of a plane crash in 1960. He finds himself in Rapture, an underwater city originally envisioned by Andrew Ryan as a utopia free from government oversight and societal constraints. However, Rapture has devolved into chaos due to civil war and the rampant abuse of a genetic substance called Adam, which grants superhuman abilities, but also leads to addiction and madness. Guided by the enigmatic Atlas, Jack navigates the dangers of Rapture, including mutated inhabitants known as Splicers and the formidable Big Daddies, while uncovering dark secrets about his own origins and the true nature of Rapture. Throughout his journey, Jack faces moral choices regarding the fate of the Little Sisters, young girls exploited for their Adam, ultimately leading to a confrontation with Ryan that reveals Jack's manipulated past and the philosophical underpinning of Rapture's collapse. Bioshock came out in 2007 and was very important for the video game medium at the time. The gameplay was smooth, the world building compelling, and it had philosophical depth that called into question free will versus determinism. This due to a twist towards the end, similar to what we discussed the Talos principle based its premise around, as the player must ultimately overcome the game's quest-giving narrator. And of course, no Bioshock analysis would be complete without an obligatory mention to its not-so-subtle nod to Ayn Rand and her objectivist philosophy. Like Ayn Rand's book Atlas Shrugged, we have a story where elites pursue a breakaway civilization, but in Bioshock it becomes a cautionary tale. However, the hidden meaning of Bioshock may be hinting at something deeper than 20th century philosopher. Noticeable is its casual use of the names of ancient Greek gods and titans. It undoubtedly brushes up against a worldview that some dismiss as ancient mythology, while others believe is the literal history of our pre-flood antediluvian world, where long-dormant otherworldly beings are desperately seeking to merge with humans, offering a promise to become gods, in order that they might emerge from the depths to take their place on the surface world. So let's go deeper into those ideas before we tie them back in with Bioshock. In other videos we discussed the war in heaven, and how angels in rebellion against God were cast out of heaven. We're also familiar with the story of creation and the Garden of Eden, where God creates mankind as the peak of his creation to reflect his glory and govern the earth. However, the serpent, one of the beings in rebellion against God, tempts Adam and Eve with the forbidden fruit. Like the other fallen beings, this causes mankind to fall too. Sin enters the world, and death becomes the destiny of all humanity, since their natural state has become estranged from God. This puts the offspring of Eve at war with the offspring of the serpent, whose head would be crushed while he strikes the other's heel. This division God himself reconciles by entering into creation as Jesus Christ, where he overcomes death through resurrection, and all of this provides us with a basic explanation for the core of Christian beliefs. But within Christianity, there's an interpretation that claims to explain ancient pagan mythologies, which ties into the story that Bioshock may be hinting at. To understand it, we'll look at Genesis 6 to discuss the origin of giants, the Nephilim, and the Watchers. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on earth, and then we learn about Noah and the flood. There are several ways that this verse gets explained. Some say that the sons of God are his righteous chosen people, and what is described is them intermarrying with members of an ungodly nation, which would be the daughters of humans, which they were forbidden from doing. The issue raised with this explanation is, why would that create Nephilim? In today's context, if a Christian had a child with a non-Christian, it doesn't produce some kind of giant. So to address this, some go a step further and say that key members of ungodly nations were demonically possessed as a way of explaining why something unnatural occurred to their offspring. Still, some go beyond this, which is relevant to our analysis of Bioshock. Since angels are described in the Bible with the ability to engage with the tactile world by eating food and going to war, perhaps that is not all they could do. The idea is that the sons of God are fallen angelic beings who themselves literally bred with human women, producing the Nephilim, these mighty hybrid giants, which are also what's being referenced by the demigods of ancient mythology. In this view, characters like Hercules actually lived and were not just a myth. This view is built on interpreting the phrase sons of God to mean beings created by God directly, firsthand, and to our knowledge, only Adam and the angels fit that definition, because Adam's children and the subsequent generations would be the sons or daughters of men. So the sons of God and the daughters of humans is ruling out that the fathers of the Nephilim were human. And perhaps humans weren't the only things these fallen angelic beings bred with, giving us an explanation for the origin of other hybrid monsters or cryptozoological creatures told in the mythological stories. So suddenly a minotaur, or the bird-headed Egyptian god Ra, is given a literal explanation. And since mankind was supposed to govern the world on God's behalf, by giving their daughters over to intermarry with fallen angelic beings in rebellion to God, it would allow their hybrid offspring to establish a hereditary claim to earth, undesired by God. These creatures would then set up kingdoms, with humans worshipping them for their apparent supernatural qualities, as if they were deities themselves, with these kingdoms inevitably descending into all manner of violence, human domination, and sacrifice. So it's no surprise that God decides to send the flood to reset creation, since his creation was not just being corrupted morally, but also all the way down to the genetic level, through all kinds of strange cosmic interspecies gene splicing, perhaps even as a demonic attempt to thwart the prophecy of God defeating evil by coming to earth in the form of a human, by attempting to destroy or corrupt the human genome itself before Christ would arrive. So the flood destroys everything except the uncorrupted flesh of Noah and his family, as well as the animals led to be stored away on the ark. After the flood, on a smaller scale, you still see giants, and some say that this was from a second incursion of interbreeding. Others say the genes were transmitted through Noah's daughters-in-law, or some would say that the giants just outright survived the flood through air pockets and caves. Either way, after that, the nation of Israel, still having a pure human bloodline, so long as they followed the instruction to not intermarry with other nations and worship their gods, would go around claiming the promised land and re-establishing God's earthly dominion that's given over to humans, killing giants along the way, the most famous being David against Goliath. They wipe out the people who were still interbreeding with otherworldly beings and sacrificing their children to demons. However, since humans are incapable of following God's law, the nation of Israel too abandons him before Jesus arrives, making salvation available to all individuals who follow him, removing the Israel-Gentile distinction. From there we get increasingly speculative. The Nephilim bloodline continues to spread, but becomes diluted enough that their existence becomes myth and fairy tale that is believed by few. despite perhaps them still existing today, which is why you hear rumors of creatures like Bigfoot, or claims of US soldiers coming in contact with a giant in a cave in Afghanistan. Those who worship demons and secret societies attempt to preserve forbidden knowledge, as well as the Nephilim bloodline still found in some monarchs, while mapping as much of the human genetic code as they can get their hands on, looking for traces of Nephilim markers. Additional are those who use the forbidden knowledge that they're guided to by the disembodied spirits of the fallen beings, which shows them how to create advanced technology in order to clone an undiluted Nephilim into the world from the fragments of the Nephilim DNA found in the aggregate of human genes, eventually leading to the appearance of an apparent godlike being, the Antichrist, the beast who is given the dragon's authority described in the book of Revelation. So it explains why Christ is described to return when it is like the days of Noah, being a reference to a world that is not just sinful, since it always has been since Eden, but in this case unique, because it's been subject to widespread demonic domination through genetic hybridization, similar to the conditions preceding the flood. Again, much of that view is speculation, and it's largely supported by non-canonical apocryphal texts like the Book of Enoch. So it isn't characteristic of what your average Christian thinks. However, what we're describing falls in line with the world that Bioshock demonstrates. So let's return to Bioshock and tie it in. Like Subnautica, Bioshock starts our story with a vessel falling from the skies, reminiscent of rebellious beings that are cast down during the war in heaven. Our player character even described as an angel when first seen by another. Also similar, the player crashes into a world covered in water, a quasi-fifth day of creation, with human origins next on deck. We approach a light tower that stands in contrast to the flooded world. Tower of Babel that successfully stretches into the heavens, that's been created by civilization submerged underwater in a post-Diluvian environment, surviving the flood. We learn that the purpose of the underwater city is an effort to become like God and be free from any government oversight or moral constraints. The underwater city is called Rapture, a phrase normally understood as an end-time event where followers of God are taken up to be with the Lord, meaning a carrying off or snatching away. In Bioshock, the city of Rapture is meant to be a heaven for the elite. Unfortunately, it's fallen into chaos due to addiction to a genetic substance that grants powerful abilities. The substance is called Adam, and when it's mixed with an actuating chemical called Eve, we're given a product that's advertised as evolution in a bottle. Curious though is that unlike what its name suggests, Adam is not human genetic material. It was initially discovered in underwater slugs. Then this foreign otherworldly genetic material mixed into humans, giving them powers, and causing them to go mad with violence, much like we earlier described otherworldly beings breeding with human women to create powerful beings, causing the world to become swept up in enough violence that God would send a flood to reset it. Throughout the game, the remnants of this genetic material is harvested from the corpse of the humans who had spliced it into their genetic code. By collecting this material, the player character can gradually aggregate these powers into themselves to become an apparent godlike being. And again, I'm sure you can see the parallel with what we described earlier. This genetic harvesting comes from young girls who have been genetically modified to host the underwater slugs internally. They are of course predictably guarded by hybrids that are for all intents and purposes giants. You're eventually instructed by the game's quest-giving narrator Atlas to confront the City of Rapture's creator, Andrew Ryan. Like a god sending the flood to cleanse the earth, you're told that Ryan plans to self-destruct his own creation, Rapture, since it has spiraled into a monstrous mockery of what he intended. To get to Ryan, you must travel to an area called Hephaestus and plant a bomb to overload a circuit in order to break into a door. This is significant because in Greek mythology, Hephaestus was the god of fire, considered the craftsman or blacksmith of the gods. It is he who Prometheus stole the fire of the gods from, giving it to humanity in defiance of the king of the gods, Zeus. This is relevant since that story has often been compared to an interpretation of the Garden of Eden, where the serpent, rather than being an evil tempter, is depicted as a heroic Promethean figure, credited as humans' liberator for stealing the fire of intellect and free will that God wanted to keep for himself, making us like God by prompting Adam and Eve to eat the forbidden fruit. So having the player in Bioshock break into Hephaestus to defeat Rapture's demiurgic creator before he floods the world is no accident. However, when you do find Andrew Ryan, the game's big twist is revealed to you, recontextualizing its narrative. Jack, the player character, is a Manchurian candidate, a mind-controlled slave sent on an assassination mission, activated by the phrase, "Would you kindly?" How your character got to the point you were at is recapped through the rapid flashbacks of a series of instructions, all prefaced with the phrase, "Would you kindly?" This includes the plane's crash that brought Jack to Rapture in the first place, because he had been activated to hijack it. Andrew Ryan even uses the activation phrase to command Jack to kill him, and he does, though this causes Jack to now become self-aware that he is a slave without free will. It's also revealed that the game's narrator, Atlas, who has been giving you instructions through the use of the activation phrase, is not who he appears either. Throughout the game you've been receiving breadcrumbs of a character named Frank Fontaine, Atlas's true identity. Fontaine was a business rival to Andrew Ryan, and the one to discover Adam, introducing genetic modification to humanity, making him our Promethean serpent figure. However, Fontaine was thought to be killed by Ryan's men in a shootout before the events of the game. In actuality, Fontaine faked his death and took on the Atlas persona, where he then ignited a civil war against Ryan, causing Rapture to fall into chaos, perpetrating his own war in heaven, but under the ocean. Also of importance is the origin of the player character Jack. When we piece everything together, Jack was the illegitimate son of Andrew Ryan from an affair. However, Fontaine corrupted Jack's development, brainwashing him and sending him on a mission to assassinate his own father. Jack had also been genetically tampered with to age rapidly and given implanted memories of an early life that never existed. While possessing the body of an adult, he's actually only 2 years old, which, when compared to the book of Genesis, could be a hint at the reduction of human lifespans that are found after the flood. And it's difficult to not make a comparison between Jack and Jesus Christ, which is where we see the inversion and the real tragedy of the story. Jack was the creator of Rapture's only begotten son. He came from outside of Rapture and entered into it to become its savior. But he doesn't enter through a virgin birth, and he isn't on a mission to give up his life to atone for humanity's corruption so that he can resurrect and defeat death. Instead, the creator's rival, the leader of a rebellion, got to him first, corrupted his genome, and sent him on a mission to commit patricide. And the player, Jack, eventually confronts Atlas, or Fontaine, also. He's become a grotesque creature due to his use of Adam, and with some help, your character ends up victorious and you beat the game. There are different endings to Bioshock, based on the player's actions, but both involve the genetically modified beings emerging from the depths of the sea to come to the surface world. In one case, it's to take control of a nuclear submarine to wage war, and in the other, it's to intermarry with humans. The tone between them is much different, but they both fit right into the framework of otherworldly genetic code in humans. So to highlight the comparisons we made, in both stories, we have a rival who leads a rebellion against the setting's creator. In both, this is done by introducing foreign DNA into the human genome, granting incredible powers, but also corrupting humanity to madness. In both, these hybrid humans are initially subdued or kept at bay by either a flood, or they have to survive in an environment submerged underwater. In both, the hybrid genetic material is being collected from humans so that it can all be aggregated into a super being. In both, the creator's only begotten son enters into creation. In both, the son conquers the leader of the rebellion. In the Bible, this is done by the son obeying his father and agreeing to sacrifice himself to be murdered and then resurrecting. In Bioshock, the son was genetically tampered with from birth to have no free will, and he was sent on a mission to commit patricide. He kills his father in obedience to his father's instructions, which doesn't mean anything because he had no free will in the first place. In Bioshock, the son supplants the rebellion leader as well as his father, whereas in the Bible, the rebel is defeated, the son and the father rule together as different persons expressing the same being, which is God. I'll reiterate that, while Jesus Christ, being the only begotten Son of God, sacrificing himself to die and be resurrected, fits within the conventional Christian framework, the aspect where the devil and his demonic angels create monstrous hybrid creatures by physically breeding their way into the world, corrupting God's creation in a seed war, is a view that isn't commonly held within Christianity and is generally considered fringe. However, despite this, critics of this view don't often have ways of addressing or explaining the presence of giants or the Nephilim without hand-waving it away as mere supernatural magic. In some cases, the Seed Wars line of thinking can lead some to come to very strange and racist conclusions, where they ascribe the demonic genes to whichever ethnic group they have an issue with. They may say that white people were created by Satan, or black people, or Jews, or Brazilians, or whoever, as a way of trying to say that any group of humans is more genetically predisposed towards evil. This is certainly not always the case with everyone who holds to the Seed Wars concept of thinking though, since the two don't have to go hand in hand. And occasionally secularists promote a concept that's similar to some of these ideas, where they say that mankind bred with aliens or transdimensional beings, which is what gave humanity our uniqueness. Rather than us being created in the image of God, they say we would have merely been animals, were it not for the extraterrestrial DNA that entered the human genome, causing us to evolve beyond other animals. We can even find this view in the movie appropriately named Prometheus from the Alien franchise. In many respects, each of the stories in the Hidden Meaning of series presents an alternate hypothetical scenario. The Lego movie is, what if Jesus gave up on his mission to restore creation and repented to the Antichrist? Subnautica is, what if Lucifer ended up winning the war in heaven against God? Skyrim is, what if Christ returned and was defeated? The Talos Principle is, what if disobeying God in the Garden of Eden was the right thing to do? And Shrouded is, what if we took on the mark of the beast and joined the hive mind? Well, Bioshock is, what if the flood failed and Jesus could be corrupted? And the Hidden Meaning of series can occasionally provoke agitation and hostility from the fan bases of content we discuss. In many respects, I don't blame people for reacting that way. People play video games to have something to escape too. And just like how they don't want their games to cram political ideology down their throats, they don't want their entertainment to cram religious ideology down their throats either. Having someone analyze their hobbies through a theological lens can feel like an attempt to turn it into that, spoiling the fun for them. And that's never been my attempt. I've always said that despite personally disagreeing with the worldviews of the content I analyze, I only end up thinking about it enough to formulate an analysis because I've enjoyed the product in the first place. However, if it upsets you to be told that there's a nefarious subtext hidden in the stories you love, well, I'm just the messenger. I'm not the one who's trying to brainwash you here. These products have always been doing that. And the least you can do is become self-aware that it's occurring. So that being said, would you kindly like and share this video with a friend? Thank you for watching.